One, two, three. All right. Now that I've clap synced and probably spent the last, 4 hours trying to sync up audio and visual because I'm trying to record things on AirPods now so that my sound is decent. Let's talk about the Renaissance. And we're doing it in a new location. We're doing it in my, let's just call it a studio. There's my neighbor's dog right on cue. I hate that dog. All right. So you can't be serious. All right. So let's talk about the Renaissance. What is it? Why does it happen? What are the ideologies that either contribute to it or that it causes? And how are, probably the biggest question, the Italian Renaissance and the Northern Renaissance different? Let's just go right down the list. Well, I'll go off my script because once again, I've written scripts so that I can do this without rambling. I'll probably still ramble a little bit. What is the Renaissance? The Renaissance is broadly defined and basically defined as a movement between the 1400s and the mid-1500s in which the culture of Europe experiences a rebirth of classical thinking, classical art styles, and classical philosophy in general. Now, what is classical this, classical that? We'll get to that in a second. Just as a side note, a lot of people like to say the Renaissance is not really a thing, and they have a great point, which is it's not as though one day Renaissance happens. It's a long building thing, and there's certainly culture and learning in Europe before the Renaissance and the Middle Ages. But for the sake of being a broad overview, we're going to say that the Renaissance is 1450 to 1550. So what causes the Renaissance? Probably the biggest contributor to the Renaissance is going to be the Black Death. And there's a whole host of reasons why the Black Death or bubonic plague is such a great cause of the Renaissance. Let's talk about economic causes first. Before the Black Death, Europe is a feudal economy. It's very agrarian. You have a lot of people that work the land making next to nothing, while the lords and knights and kings of the area really rake in money. I said knights and nobles, which is kind of redundant because a noble is a knight, but you understand what I'm saying. With the Black Death coming through and wiping out, by most estimates, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of the European population, all of a sudden the peasants, who are not so great in number and are now essential workers, to use a term that is very relevant during coronavirus, can make demands about their pay, their living situations, the land that they get to work. They really kind of throw a wrench in this economic system, and all of a sudden you don't have to be a peasant, or if you are a peasant, your life is much better, and it upsets the social order. And certainly the Renaissance is going to do a lot to upset the social order, although for most people that are not incredibly wealthy, the Renaissance is not suddenly this godsend. Their lives are very much the same, if slightly improved. The other thing, though, that the Black Death does is it throws doubt on the great ideology of the Middle Ages, which we'll come back to, which is Catholicism. The Catholic Church is having a rough go of it at the time. There's clear corruption in the Catholic Church. They've had multiple popes at the same time, which, if you know anything about Catholicism, there's only supposed to be one. People like Jan Hus have started to question the authority of the Pope. And then the Black Death comes along, and all of a sudden the Pope is helpless. The Catholic Church is helpless to stop this so-called, message from God. And also, quite frankly, they're afraid of it, which leads to a lot of what's called absenteeism. And the Catholic Church, foregoing its responsibilities and abandoning people, Catholics in need, casts a lot of doubt on the Catholic Church. And once the Catholic Church starts to recede a little bit, although still very powerful, from the culture, you're going to have the replacement of it with the Renaissance culture. But the other things that will cause it will also be Catholic Church-led. The Catholic Church, in an effort to reassert the dominance of the Pope, will have a thing called the Council of Constance. We're not going to get into a lot about the Council of Constance, but understand that the men that leave from the Council of Constance and go into Northern Europe to deal with these Catholic Church reformers like Jan Hus will return with classical and ancient Catholic texts that will start to bring about old ideas once again. So new ideas that are not actually new, they're actually old ideas. And then at the same time, another major world religion is making a move on Europe, which is the Ottoman Empire, and by extension, the forces of Islam, for lack of a better way to put it. The Ottoman Empire is an empire that is Islamic, and they invade one of the great European cities of Constantinople, converting it to Istanbul. When they do that, a lot of the classical scholars of the area that really know these ancient classical texts, once again, what is classical text? We're about to get into it, are going to also make their way to Europe. So you're going to have people starting to doubt the Catholic Church, people starting to upset the social order, and then you're also going to have the returning of classical and ancient church documents from both Northern Europe and Eastern Europe, all to Italy. Italy really lucks out on this because of their geography. They're a trade port. A lot of different cultures all meet there. And also, there's a lot of money in Italy simply because there's a lot of trade in Italy, which means a lot of money can be spent on cultural projects, which will be very important to the Renaissance. But let's talk about the isms of all of it, the ideologies. We've already discussed Catholicism a little bit. The thing you need to understand about Catholicism is every age is a struggle between the conservative order, which in this case will be Catholicism, the traditional order, and the new ideas. These new ideas will come out of these classical texts. So what are these classical texts? What is classical or classicalism, if you want to really sound smart? Classicalism, you know what, if you want to think about it from an art perspective, think Roman or Greek art, nude marble statues, columns, domes, the Colosseum, classical, mythological paintings of Greek or Roman gods. Classical is a focus on Roman and Greek art, philosophy, ways of thinking, all of these things. And out of this classical art tradition and this classical philosophy, you're going to get really the big ideology that defines the Renaissance, which is humanism, or a focus on the individual. My neighbors are being incredibly loud right now. They're probably going to continue to be loud. Let's talk about humanism. What is humanism? Humanism is a focus on the individual and the individual's effort. Now, this flies right in the face of Catholicism, because Catholicism is all about the collective effort for one, God or the Pope. Humanism is what can the individual do. Now, I often like to say there are two flavors of humanism: secular humanism and Christian humanism. Let's talk about secular humanism first. Secular humanism is a focus on the individual's life and them enjoying things of this world, worldly things. A lot of people struggle with this concept. It's really easy. If it's not focused on religion and getting into heaven and the afterlife and what you can do for the Catholic Church, it's secular. If you grew up in any kind of Protestant religion, you probably heard about the evils of secular music. It just means music that's not church music. This is going to be focused primarily in the Southern or Italian Renaissance. Italian Renaissance equals secular humanism. And from the secular humanism, you're going to get a lot of the corruptions of the Catholic Church, which will eventually lead to the Reformation, which we will discuss at a later date. The other humanism is a reaction to secular humanism. It is Christian humanism. Christian humanism, it's still about the individual, but what can the individual do to improve the society? These humanists are going to be focused on the failures of the Catholic Church and how might they improve upon the Catholic Church's practices to bring the Catholic Church back to a position where it helps the least fortunate in their society, which, of course, is what the Catholic Church is supposed to do, especially in the eyes of these reformers. So let's talk about the two Renaissances to wrap this up. How are they different? How do they challenge one another? And what culturally represents each one? So how are they different? Italian Renaissance is secular and it's first. Okay? It's going to be about the people of Italy after the Black Death deciding with this new philosophy of classical thinking that they are going to enjoy their lives. They don't become atheists or something like that. They are still Catholic, but they are not focused on the Catholic Church solely. They are focused on how might they enjoy their lives and the time that they have, because they see with the Black Death that it can be gone like that. I mean, the Black Death, has what, 80% death rate in some situations, and it kills in a week. So this secular humanism is going to be all Italian Renaissance. Italian Renaissance is really going to be known for its art, most of all. In fact, what artwork best exemplifies the Italian Renaissance? I would probably have to say Botticelli's Birth of Venus. Truly an amazing painting. It's got all the things you associate with the Renaissance. You've got a nude figure. You've got a figure that is not anyway Christian. It is a Greek mythological scene. It is the birth of Venus, or Aphrodite, to use the other name. She is standing in a pose that is contrapposto, which is very classical, this idea that she is in movement. She's not straight up and down. There's a focus on the individual form, from the eyes to the musculature of the figures. And there's a sense of drama as well, which is also very classical. It's not about the message of the painting as much as the drama of it. Now let's talk Northern Renaissance. Northern Renaissance is going to be about how might the individual improve the society in which they live. Northern Renaissance will really be a challenge to the Italian Renaissance. In fact, Northern Renaissance, Northern humanists, Christian humanists, will lead to the Reformation eventually with Martin Luther, who's also in the north of Europe. It's not coincidental. The artwork that most exemplifies the Northern Renaissance, there's quite a few examples, but I would probably have to say the Merode altarpiece. This is a piece that is religious. It is not a big flashy piece, and it is full of religious symbols. Northern Renaissance artwork is very much more religious than Italian Renaissance. Italian Renaissance works, even if they are super religiously themed, like the Sistine Chapel, they are not religious in the way that the purpose of the art is religious. The purpose of art in the Northern Renaissance is the religion. In fact, a lot of Northern Renaissance artworks, like the Arolfini wedding portrait, don't appear to be religious at all, but they are very religious in symbols. And the reason is quite simply because some Northern Renaissance communities consider any representation of Jesus or God as idolatry, and those paintings would be destroyed in iconoclasm. The Northern Renaissance takes religion much more seriously. There's also a literature component to both of these movements, and very quickly, let me just give you some examples of those. If you're talking Italian Renaissance, you're probably going to think Machiavelli with The Prince, or you're going to think Castiglione. Castiglione, however, you want to stereotypically say it, with The Courier. Both of these works are works about how to be an effective person, not necessarily a good person, especially with the case of The Prince, but an effective person. These are very secular texts. They are not focused on religion. In fact, Machiavelli's The Prince and The Courtier often talk about how, while it's good to appear religious, sometimes it is not the most prudent thing to actually be a pious or religious person. Northern Renaissance couldn't be more different. You've got In Praise of Folly with Erasmus. You've got Sir Thomas More with Utopia, and they are both texts that criticize the current social order specifically in a lot of cases, especially with Erasmus, the failures of the church. And then in the case of Sir Thomas More's Utopia, how might a society be improved? So those are the differences between the two Renaissances and also what the Renaissance is. I hope this clears up some questions you might have. It's a very basic look at the Renaissance, but I think a lot of times people don't understand the basics of the Renaissance, therefore they don't understand the complexities of the Renaissance. So I'm going to sign off. I don't actually have a good sign off at all. I was going to dab, but that's probably a bad idea. I'll just fade to black. I think I can do that in this new software I have. So fade to black.